I don't think we heard anything or saw anything today that changes what we all know Donald Trump stands for. It's a very narcissistic and self-motivated, self-beneficial view of leadership. It's a dictator. I heard somebody use the phrase soft dictatorship. Um, I hope it's only a soft dictatorship, when these 4 years are over. That he has a very dictatorial view of what the White House is, of what the Oval Office is. There's no question that that the Republican Party is embracing, and under Donald Trump's plan for leadership, we are moving toward an oligarchy type of leadership and authoritarian type of leadership.
Donald Trump now, once again, President Trump signed 100 executive orders within hours of swearing the oath and returning to the White House. They included a declaration of an emergency on the US-Mexico border, a new ban on immigration from Muslim-majority countries, and pulling out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Joe Sternberg is a member of the Wall Street Journal's editorial board, and he joins us now. Joe, morning to you.
Good morning.
You've been a great guide to us over the course of the last, 4 years when it comes to American politics. What did you make of the tone and the tenor and the attitude coming out of that inauguration?
Well, I thought that the tone of the inaugural address was different from what we had 8 years ago when he was first inaugurated in January of 2017. I mean, that speech back then became famous for the phrase American carnage that he actually used in it. And people remarked at the time that it was an unusually bleak inaugural address. I mean, we usually look at these events to be kind of uplifting, unifying, to focus on the better angels of our nature, to use a phrase from one of Lincoln's inaugural addresses. And I think that Trump kind of got back into that more traditional pattern yesterday. I mean, there were some classic Trump touches. I think that he was much more aggressively negative about his political opponents and the agenda that he intends to reverse from the previous administration than you would often expect from these things. But there were also some more of the traditional grace notes about, talking about America as a country and some of our exceptional accomplishments over the course of our history that I think much more resonate with what people would actually expect from an event like that.
Some parts of American political culture are just baffling, I think, to the people in this country. I mean, the headlines a lot this morning are him pardoning 1,500 of the January 6th rioters. That comes after Joe Biden pre-pardoned, effectively, members of his own family and members of the political classes, including Anthony Fauci, who he thinks Trump would go after. How does that play in America? I mean, January 6th, I suppose, is it to the majority of Americans, was a disgrace, a stain on democracy? Vance said they weren't going to pardon everyone, and they appear to have done that. Is that a sign of just how powerful he is? Is that popular? What do you make of that as a move?
Oh, I think that this is a terrible decision. I mean, some of the executive orders I think are very positive. This is not one of them, because I would have hoped that they would follow through on their commitment to actually vet each of these cases individually to make sure that people who actually had broken serious laws would not be included. But I think that, part of the problem that you're going to face with this is that Americans are going to look at the whole picture, and we already had some of these unprecedented pardons of from the former President Biden, now of his own family members, and this very long list of commutations and other pardons that he released in the last month of his administration that were also highly unusual. And I think that, part of the issue that you also run into is that the Biden administration had set this pattern of prosecuting political opponents, which unfortunately now traps us in this cycle where they are going to start pardoning their own supporters preemptively to try to avoid that from the next person coming in.
It's a crazy way to run a country. Perhaps the most significant thing he said, I wonder if you agree with this, Joe, because I think it does impact everyone around the world, coming out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which we knew he was going to do. But this idea that drill, baby, drill, net zero is a fraud. It's going to be very hard for Western politicians, I think, in other countries to go to their electorate. You need to spend money. You might need to make some sacrifices because we're all in this together. When they're going to look across the Atlantic and say, do you know what? America doesn't think net zero is real. America thinks fossil fuels are still the present and the future. We're not going to do that anymore. I wonder if that's the biggest impact globally that's going to come out of this administration, at least in the beginning.
It probably is. And, this is another example of the Trump phenomenon where, because of Trump's personality politically and his willingness to do this sort of thing, he's actually going to give permission to a lot of other, Western politicians to do what they probably want to do anyway. I mean, look, before we started our conversation a couple minutes ago, we were listening to news bulletins about a third runway at Heathrow. Yeah. I mean, I think that this government in Britain is concluding, whether or not they're willing to admit it, that a lot of the net zero policies that they were committed to are not something that Britain can afford with the economy and the condition that it's in. And so, good news for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, because now they have an opportunity politically to back out of some of those and blame Trump for it. I mean, it's kind of a win-win.
Yeah, it's interesting whether they do that or not, Joe. It's a very good way of putting it. Great to speak to you as ever. Thank you so much. That's Joe Sternberg there, member of the Wall Street Journal's editorial board, regular on this programme, explaining American politics to us. Earlier on, we spoke to Jennifer Horn. She's co-founder of the Lincoln Project. So she's a former Republican chair, but she hates Donald Trump. We're going to speak to people who are more pro-Donald Trump, but this is from the position of the right, who is a bit mistrustful of him. Was that the Republican Party we saw today at Donald Trump's inauguration?
Well, it was certainly today's Republican Party, yes. Donald Trump has twice now been elected by the Republican Party to become president of the United States, not just the leader of the party or the leader of our country, but by many people's, perception and estimation, leader of the free world. What we saw today, what we heard today from Donald Trump is exactly what the Republican Party now embraces and identifies with.
And what's the message you took from it? If you had to boil it down to what Donald Trump stands for, what would you say it is?
Well, I don't think we heard anything or saw anything today that changes what we all know Donald Trump stands for. It's a very narcissistic and self-motivated, self-beneficial view of leadership. It's I heard somebody use the phrase soft dictatorship. I hope it's only a soft dictatorship, when these 4 years are over. He has a very dictatorial view of what the White House is, of what the Oval Office is. There's no question that the Republican Party is embracing, and under Donald Trump's plan for leadership, we are moving toward an oligarchy type of leadership and authoritarian type of leadership. I think that there was an attempt by Donald Trump, if you listen to the words that he used, to sound more patriotic, maybe. There was an interesting AI analysis of his speech that showed that his language was, I guess, more inspirational, or an attempt at more inspirational. Okay. And yet at the same time, a congressman from Massachusetts said it was the darkest speech he's ever heard from a president in an inauguration. So I guess a lot of it depends on where you stand or what your view is before you even heard the speech.
What I find interesting is that you hear the criticism of him as a dictator, as an authoritarian, and yet he has this popular approval, and the vision he set out is a vision that he spoke of very clearly in the run-up. Mm-hmm. And not everyone in America, clearly. I mean, he won a bare majority, but it's a majority. So a big chunk of Americans want this stuff. So I wonder whether you hear, particularly from the left, it's a dictatorship or it's an authoritarian, but it's populist, and populist means what the majority of the people want.
Well, and if we look at history, we know that populism many times has developed into and grown into some very ugly periods of leadership in other countries and in the past. And so it's always interesting that balance of populism and democracy can be really complicated. For me, at least, and I think millions of other Americans probably like me, Donald Trump's election was an enormous disappointment. And I think it's frightening when you consider what the actual impact of 4 years of Donald Trump's leadership, should it unfold the way that he lays it out, the narrative that he's giving us, it could be frightening not just to us, but to what the impact that has globally around the world. And you just mentioned something about, but the majority of Americans voted for Donald Trump. Absolutely correct. But that doesn't mean that he isn't a soft dictator or an authoritarian or moving us toward an oligarchy type of leadership. Doesn't make all just because people voted for him doesn't mean that's not true. It also doesn't mean that those people voted for that. We know that not everybody considers their vote and how they vote the same way that some do. And very quickly, because I know you want to move on to another subject, another question. There was also a poll done recently, I think it was in December, here in America, that showed that a vast number of people who acknowledged that they had just voted for Donald Trump also said that they had real concerns about the economy, about other, concerns about what Donald Trump will do in these areas of the economy and national security and global security. So it's fascinating to me to think about how those voters were thinking.
And how they'll respond over the next 4 years.
Right.
Are you surprised, Jennifer, how so many people are giving him a shot? I'm very struck by this, watching it from afar, that the protests that were there in 2016, they're there, but they're much more muted. Most people, we have a left-wing government in this country. They're making the platitudinous noises about Donald Trump because they've got to work with him, which is understandable. But it strikes me that there's an awful lot of people that we speak to on this program who are willing to give him a go, who say, you've got this mandate, you're more organized this time. We are going to see if what you think is the right thing is the right thing. He strikes me as getting more of a fair crack this time than he did in 2016. Is that fair?
Well, I don't know. I don't think that fair isn't the word that I would use probably in this conversation in that manner. Once somebody is elected president of the United States, and I put myself in this category, every anti-Trump person in the country, but around the world, once someone is elected to become president of the United States, you have, first as Americans, you have to want them to succeed. You have to wish them well, because to do otherwise is to say that you don't want America to succeed. You don't want democracy to succeed. When I look at it and say, I don't believe that America can be protected or democracy can be preserved under the type of leadership Donald Trump brings forward. And I think when you talk about folks around the world, leaders around the world, they have to be able to work with America. They know what the consequences are. They aren't going to come out, with a belligerent type of opening statement when and it's not just Trump, any new person.
But maybe it's more than Trump as well, though, Jennifer. You look at that rotunda, and there's Musk, Bezos, the Google guy, the Microsoft guy, basically
Google guy.
Yeah, that's every tech bro I could think of was there.
Yeah. Yes.
And you think to yourself, well, that's impossible to stand against. That is the most powerful group of people possibly ever assembled in the history of humanity, if you look at it.
Well, and let's think about what that means. I've already talked to, reference the idea of an oligarchy. To your point, we are talking about the richest people. We are talking about the most influential and the most controlling people in the world. Their power and their the degree and the extent, the reach of their power is immeasurable. It's something we've never seen before. And first of all, just to see them sitting next to, nominees for heads of, for, department heads, for agency heads, behind the president on the day of his inauguration, that's unprecedented. But that is sending a very clear message. Trump isn't hiding what he's doing and the type of government and type of leadership he's putting together. These are the people that he's going to depend on, not just for campaign money, but these are the people he's depending on for policy, for leadership, to bring him forward. We saw a clear example of this just last month, just a couple weeks earlier this month, a couple weeks ago, when the spending bill failed. The original bipartisan spending agreement failed, not because Trump came forward, he originally supported it. It was because Elon Musk, the richest, most influential man in the world, who has the greatest financial benefit through government contracts of anyone else in the world, he said, I don't like
Yeah.
this. This isn't going to work for me. And so Trump changed his mind on it. That's what scares me about the path our country is going to take over the next 4 years.